The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to the program here, Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball with Reverend Robert Cornegay from Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and also Bishop Doc Loomis, Bishop in Residence at All Saints Anglican Church in Newport. And what are y'all doing? Y'all already distracting me, pointing at each other.
We're ready to go, Ben.
Sitting on ready, Ben.
That's right. It must be the new year. Here we are, and again on with a number of different articles, a variety of articles that have come out in the past week or so. And this is an ongoing story. This is not something that's just happened. This is something that's just come back into the news, really, after taking place over the last several months. I'll read from the Fox News article. Illinois professor says Christian college is wrong to try firing her for Islam comments. A professor at a Chicago area Christian college said Wednesday that administrators were wrong in taking steps to fire her after she asserted that Christians and Muslims worship the same God. Lauricia Hawkins told reporters that she met with Wheaton College administrators several times and provided statements explaining her beliefs, which she believes are lined up, that's actually misprinted here, with the college's mission. She said that she was initially told further discussion wasn't needed, but college officials then changed requirements, saying her tenure would be revoked while she would have to participate in 2 years of conversations. Hawkins spoke Wednesday surrounded by religious leaders, including the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Wheaton College said it placed Hawkins on administrative leave in December because of theological statements that seem inconsistent with Wheaton College's doctrinal convictions, which she voluntarily agreed to support and uphold when she entered into an employment agreement with the college. And that last statement is a quote there. Doc, you have some connection to Wheaton. You're familiar with that and with that doctrinal statement, right?
I am, and let me begin by saying that when Jesse Jackson shows up and stands next to you in support, your cause is lost. So we'll just start with that. I think that she's going to be fired. I don't think there's any question in that. And there is a mission at Wheaton to educate students by demonstrating and giving them access to different viewpoints about matters of faith and religion, and I think that's what she's referring to. That what she was doing by saying that we have the same God and we worship, out of the same book, that this is her way of inspiring conversation, debate. But the reality is that when professors start at Wheaton, they're required.
And everybody at Wheaton.
I'm sorry. Yes, they're actually required to look at a series of documents, and one of those is called a statement of faith. And where the inconsistency with what she's done is, number one, what she's done, these are not comments about Islam. She is a teacher, so it is a teaching about Islam. Two, it is inconsistent with the statement of faith, which clearly says that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and he is the only way to the Father. So the school is standing on, I guess, what it was that they understand to be their entrance requirement for any teacher, and she's simply saying, well, I thought the whole thing was to inspire debate, and so this is kind of the way the two sides are viewing it right now. But she'll be dismissed soon, and frankly should be.
But your understanding from Wheaton College is that they do inspire debate. I mean, they bring in outside speakers in order to fulfill that mission. Right?
They have brought in notable Muslims over particularly these past several years. And they're always very inspiring debates. You can see some of them online. You can read the transcripts of them. But that's very different than when a teacher starts speaking these things from that position. Again, it's no longer a comment. Now it is considered to be the belief of the school, and it's just not. It's inconsistent with their statement of faith.
Robert, is Wheaton College right to stand by this statement?
Oh, absolutely. And you'll find that most higher education, whether secular or sacred, if you will, religious, have statements of positions, and there's certain criteria that by which, for the professors especially, and she's approaching this from and you know, if you read the backstory a little bit on her, you know, she's a recently tenured, and going through that process of being becoming tenured, you know, prior to that, you really cannot be controversial at all. You really have to toe the line. But there's this sense that once you become tenured, then you've got some security and you can start pushing on the edges. And she's been kind of walking on some theological edges for a while. And it's in this area, it's in other areas concerning, you know, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, all that stuff that's kind of in the news now. And so she's been kind of pushing the edges for a while. And this is where she stepped over. And she also kind of created the problem when she would not really have a dialogue. And I think, Doc, you were referring to that in another article that's available online, that basically she's rejected the process of going through reconciliation. And that's what the school has been trying to do, is get her
Wheaton
into...
has actually been through this several times. This is not the first time this has happened to Wheaton. And what Wheaton always does is goes to the professor, tries to engage them in conversation designed to bring about reconciliation. It's a biblical thing. And, you know, I applaud Wheaton for doing that. And unfortunately, what happened with this professor is the minute that they came to her and said, let's enter into conversations, she went public and said, I absolutely under no circumstances will be involved in more conversations. There's no doubt in my mind that they didn't change a timeline or requirements. Wheaton, the back end of their website is, you know, they've published the media releases day by day by day, and they're very consistent one with the other. And it's very clear that they asked her very early on to engage in a conversation to bring about reconciliation, and for whatever reason known only to her, she refused. That really left them with no choice but to do what they've now done, to place her on administrative leave and then begin the process of conversations toward termination.
Yeah.
Now, in a lot of the media, attention has been around a particular action of hers, which was to wear the, what do you call it, the hijab? Is that hijab, to wear that headscarf in solidarity. When speaking about Muslim protests and other events and other things going on around the world and in locally as well too, and so the media has made a lot out of that. In fact, she shows up at press conferences wearing that.
Correct.
But that's not ever been part of the discussion from Wheaton's point of view. They have said it's really her statements. It's not, she can wear that if she likes.
Correct. You know, I mean, the term, they're going to keep it in the theological world,
right?
You know, the doctrinal world, because that's where these issues really, and you know, she's complicated it, and by bringing in, you know, some other things as well, and you know, this whole thing, you know, recently the Pope has said that we all worship the same God, that Allah is the same as Jehovah for the Jews, or the Father for Christians. And you know, this has gotten it all mixed up. I mean, Wheaton is not an how can I say this? It's not a ecumenical education facility in the sense that it's fairly conservative evangelical position. And you read their statement of faith, and you know, it goes along with the Lausanne statement and other documents that back that up.
It's not a school that, for example, had maybe Christian origins, but have long since abandoned that.
Correct.
As a,
that many have.
As a theme.
And you know, obviously, she would probably be more comfortable on that kind of a campus where, you know, some of those boundaries aren't drawn so tightly. I mean, Wheaton is, you know, Billy Graham's school. You know, he's a big dog, you know, involved with Wheaton, and so you got to respect that,
right?
know.
Right. I think that probably the public discussion over this mainly centers, it suffers from a lack of theological understanding.
Correct.
So the statements are made about the Hajib, the statements are made about worshiping the same God, the statements are made about these one thing or another, and there's no great understanding of what that theological significance is.
And that's why, Ben, it's so easy for a Jesse Jackson or even this gal to turn it into they don't like Muslims thing, which is what this has become. And you see Wheaton now having to respond to the situation by saying, we actually applaud her care, Ms. Hogg's care for Muslims, and the fact that she, that she wants to be supportive of Muslims in this time where it's kind of dangerous to be a Muslim in this country. But that's not what they're talking about at all. Wheaton doesn't have anything against Muslims. I can tell you, there's just nothing there that would suggest that they don't like Muslims. And what Jesse, if you read Jesse Jackson's statements, that's what he's turning this whole thing into. Wheaton is an anti-Muslim school. Wow, nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. So Robert's right. They're going to keep this in the theological and let it stay there until it plays out. And the way it plays out is she loses her job, and that's that.
That's right.
We'll have more to come in a moment on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Hey, welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thank you for joining us here this morning. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. And our next subject that we're going to talk about is the latest announcement about guns made by President Obama. And the article that has responded to that is from a website called Religious Dispatches from USC Annenberg. And in announcing new executive actions by Sarah Posner, in announcing new executive action to more rigorously enforce requirements for background checks to purchase guns, President Obama today called for balancing the rights of gun owners with other constitutional rights. Second Amendment rights are important, she's quoting the president, but there are other rights that we care about as well, and we have to be able to balance them. He then enumerated cases of gun violence in places of worship and people murdered with guns because of their faith. We have a, quote, right to worship freely and safely, end quote, Obama said, and that right was denied to Christians in Charleston, South Carolina, and was denied to Jews in Kansas City, and was denied Muslims in Chapel Hill and Sikhs in Oak Creek. They had rights too. Hearing that list again of people targeted because of their faith or targeted in a religious setting was stunning and sobering all over again, even if you remembered in the back of your mind that gruesome map of gun-related deaths with overlay of religious motivation. And it was a smart stroke of political rhetoric listen, is your right to own a gun so sacrosanct that it trumps other rights, particularly the religious freedom rights that many conservatives selectively champion? That's, again, Sarah Posner's position here. She's the author of God's Prophets, Faith, Fraud, and the Republican Crusade for Value Voters. Now,
completely unbiased reporting there.
Right. But I think this goes to, and, I took a constitutional law course in college, just one, and I took other basic law courses. This is not the way I learned it about how rights are promulgated and how they're to be expressed.
You didn't study,
but I didn't study
where, Yale, and
Harvard and Yale and the Ivy Leagues like that. No.
Yeah, well, it's hard not to react to this that way, because it is displays such ignorance of the intent of the Constitution when it comes to why we have a Bill of Rights. Originally there was not going to be a Bill of Rights enumerated in the Constitution because the assumption was, well, everybody knows this. Why state the obvious? It's not necessary to itemize these rights that we have. And that was a big debate. And finally, they put it in. Madison, I believe, is the one put it in there. And so when you look at those rights, it's not a pick one. It's not a what's the word?
They all exist.
Yeah,
they're concurrent.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's not an either or. And it's not to a degree, and where one overshadows the other. And I mean, they are all rights that we have given to us by God, and the purpose of government is to protect those rights, to not, and particularly in the second one, the government is not to infringe upon those rights. And so when he basically comes out with a position that all the rights are need to be balanced,
right?
Basically, he's saying, we can just infringe on any of those rights. And I'm not saying that they can't be regulated to a degree. There's a regulation that is prudent, but it's not in the same manner in which he's saying. And I think, Doc, you have a position on this as well. Maybe I'm wrong. What, Doc? Are you with us, buddy?
I did have to take a law test when I moved to North Carolina, and fortunately, I passed. I got all the signs right. I got most of the rules of the road right. So I feel like I have a little bit of a law degree in North Carolina right now. The thing about this is that these rights are established for our mutual benefit and for our protection and for our joy. Frankly, it is what liberty's about, is contained in this stuff.
Right.
And here's the thing: if you take one of these away, then you're saying that I can take any of these away. If you're saying that one trumps another, one can be used to suppress another, you are way out of line with what our founding fathers were thinking when they did this. What the founding fathers did was they established a thing called punishment. This goes back to the end of the 17th century and John Locke in his treatises on government. The way that you protect people in a place where there are rights is to punish people who violate those rights. So the answer to the question is, you don't suppress guns to support so that people don't get shot in churches. You punish people who shoot people in churches to dissuade others from shooting people in churches. That's how you protect the religious. This is so conflated, this argument right here. I don't think I've ever seen a president of the United States so conflate a situation to get his way. It's almost a passive-aggressive way of saying, I'm going to cry about all these poor little children and these little ladies in their churches who've been killed, but what I really want to do is I want to whittle this sucker down and take their guns away, and that's what he's doing. It is a conflated lie, and anybody who's a constitutionalist would probably understand this. John Locke is turning in his grave.
Yeah. Lockwood had on Viewpoints the other night, had a constitutional professor who called his argument feckless, which I thought was a pretty good way to describe that, saying that, one, he's not really accomplishing anything. That none of the tragedies that he speaks of here would have been prevented by any of these. Now, but the other side is that it also is just completely counter to what we understand as constitutional law and how law is developed. He
is trying to give people who have no relationship to this argument or this debate standing. You understand what I mean? These people don't have standing in the debate over the gun show loophole, as he calls it, because none of these people were shot by a gun that was purchased at a gun show. So it's another conflating. He's trying to put two things together that don't belong together. He's saying these people have standing in this conversation when they don't. They were not affected by the very things he's trying to change. And then the blatant lie, I'm in a mood today, I'm sorry. Then the blatant lie the other day about online gun sales and closing that loophole. I can't tell you how many guns I've purchased online, but the way it works is you buy a gun online, it gets shipped to a licensed federal firearms dealer. I go to that dealer, I do a background check in front of that dealer, and I get my gun as surely as if I'd walked into a gun store and bought it.
Exactly.
And the president has bald-faced lied on these things.
Yeah.
And I don't think It's very clear where he's going with this, and where he's going with this, he's going to have a big wagon load of all of our guns with him.
Yeah.
And we can't have that happen.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. I did read a response to this, not to this article, but to
because this
President's
article
position.
again, the headline is how Obama made gun control a religious freedom issue.
Yeah.
Now-
And Russell Moore, who is the director of ethics and
Right, with the
Southern Baptist, and speaks out on these quite often, these issues. He says, and I'm just going to read a little bit of what he wrote. Wherever one stands on gun control, no one is denying the personhood of gun victims or their rights to be protected from violence. Whatever one thinks about gun control, no one in the American debate today supports selling guns to those who intend to kill. The question instead is how to prevent guns from being used criminally. And I think what we're seeing, what to me, the president's motivation in this was to basically criminalize gun ownership. That he's basically saying anyone that is interested in owning a gun is potentially criminal in that position, that
Right.
there's a defect somehow. It's almost like the hate crime thing, that if you're getting not to behavior, you're getting to the way you think about things. And he's basically, to me, it appears that he's drawing this big generalization around gun ownership and saying, obviously, there's something kind
Right.
of wrong.
Well, he's saying it in a very specific way that doctors become criminologists. The doctors may be ones who can say, who may determine whether or not somebody can own a gun.
Yeah, I went online and looked at the federal firearm. They've actually posted. They said they've updated their regulations to have a federal firearm license, which is basically where this is going. That if you're going to sell your gun to someone else, you've got to apply for a federal license to be able to do that, whether it's one or two or what,
Or do it through a licensed agent.
or do it through a licensed agency.
Which is what I have done for years.
well, yeah, and
I have
that's-
sold any number of guns,
Yeah.
including semi-automatic weapons, and I always fill out paperwork, and I always go into a license. They will charge you to do this.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. For my conscience,
They-
it's worth it to find out that my gun doesn't show up at the scene of a crime down the road.
Exactly. And so where this thing is going is, as you mentioned, the doctors are now going to be the ones that are determining, their track on the mental health thing is how do we get this reporting stiffened up?
Right.
And so they're looking at ways and using the doctors to ask the questions. I mean, they're doing it now. They're asking these questions when you go in and have an appointment. And are there guns in your house?
And yet the irony of this is the things that actually kill people, like alcohol,
Right.
have none of these requirements.
Right.
I have to show a driver's license when I go in to buy alcohol. That's it. I don't have to register. They don't have to call me in. They don't have to find out if I have a DUI. They don't have to find out if I've been convicted of voluntary or involuntary manslaughter. And when I go home, if I want to sell you that same bottle, I don't have to apply for a thing.
Yeah.
What takes more lives every year? I got an idea. It's alcohol. This is just misplaced. This is silliness.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it is. It's a bandwagon. So, we're going to work through this. It's going to constitutionally, it's not there. He doesn't have that authority. So it's going to go through the courts.
And there'll be target practice at Robert's house this Friday at 3. Please come by.
And welcome to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm with Reverend Robert Cornegy and also Bishop Doc Loomis. I'm Ben Ball, and thanks for joining us here today. This next article we want to look at is from ChristianHeadlines.com. It's called Soulmates, Bad Theology, False Expectations, and Deep Disappointment. Ronald Reagan once quipped that the trouble with political opponents is not that they're arrogant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. Well, I've had a bee in my bonnet. This is the writer that's speaking. His name is Eric McTaxis. I think we've had his articles before. Yeah. It says, well, I've had a bee in my bonnet for years over something that far too many of my fellow Christians believe that just isn't so. I speak, gentle listener, of the whole soulmate nonsense, especially when it comes to finding a husband or wife. Let me be perfectly clear. Now, no matter how many ads you see for Christian dating services you hear or trendy books you read, we simply don't have, quote, soulmates, at least as our confused culture understands them. Does this surprise you? It shouldn't. Look for that concept, by the way, in the Bible. And the only thing you can find remotely close to it is the fierce friendship of David and Jonathan. Jonathan made a covenant with David, Scripture says, because he loved him as his own soul. Now, those are soulmates, friends, but the Bible knows nothing of romantic soulmates. This concept is more New Age than Christian. The Huffington Post gives 9 signs that you found your soulmate. The first one, you communicate without speaking. I feel like I have to do rounded voice for this. You communicate without speaking.
That's right.
Right.
That's like from the, what was the movie where he said, love is never having to say you're sorry.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
This is a...
I'm taking my wife to see that movie. I've been 35 years of saying I'm sorry. Okay.
This concept, though, I think has gained new momentum again with the popularity of internet dating, of the thinking that somehow in 140 characters you're finding your soulmate on Twitter, or that somewhere in that vast virtual universe there is a soulmate, and it's that universe that's going to help me find it. Do you think that's true, Robert? That has sort of spurred this new interest?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, I was, back in my back when I was built for speed, I was
falling off a cliff. You mean, yes.
I was kind of in the new age, I was a new age wannabe and poser.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing was, there is your cosmic match out there, and that the planets one day will align and you'll find that one. And that's really what that whole astronomy gig is all about, is finding that one, getting your signs, your astrological signs to match properly. You can't date a Virgo if you're a Leo, or however those things go. You have to find this one that's just perfectly tuned.
Well, instead of going to the card reader out on Highway 101 now, you can go online and do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Christian Mingle, I think, is
that's one of them.
One of them, yeah, that's right. Match.com. Not that I've been looking or anything, but happily married, 42 years. Love you, Josie.
Quick to get that in. Well, Doc, is this again? This is obviously we're not necessarily of that generation. However, I'll take that back though. I do know a lot of older people now that are matching up online because they felt like they've led a life of disappointment, and now they're going to find their soulmate online.
Yeah. So the argument here really is what? That the only person who's my soulmate is my Savior. The only person who has control of my soul, per se. So partly this is a semantics argument, isn't it? About what is the nature of the soul and who can mate with my soul and who is my soulmate. And for me, I agree with the writer here. Eric is a smart guy. Jesus is my soulmate. I mean, if I have one, that's him. And he satisfies all the things that my soul requires. Now, if I'm just trying to be a little more colloquial and I'm just using my soul as some mysterious romantic notion, that's fine. But biblically, I am a Christian, and as a Christian, when I think about a mate, I think about the way that God thought about mates in Genesis and later writes about them in the 31st chapter of Proverbs when he's talking about a good wife. And here in Genesis, we find that the Lord says, it's not good for this man to be alone. And so we're going to make him a helpmate. So when I think about a soulmate, I actually think about a helpmate. I have somebody to come alongside me that, as Ephesians says, and Eric brings up here, I would be willing to lay down my life for. Yes, but this person is my helpmate. Proverbs 31 takes it even further and says this person should be strong and talented, should take care of the children, should be a good mother whose charm and beauty should be without parallel, who fears the Lord. And so for a Christian person, I don't know here's what a soulmate is. A soulmate is when some girl looks at you and says, he really understands me.
Yes.
Ladies, let me tell you something. He doesn't really understand you. He's tolerating you. No man has ever understood a woman. He has tolerated you until he's got you, and
We've
then you will
gone in
find
that
out
direction
that
now.
he actually does not understand you, and the soulmate disappears. And so that's when the divorce happens, and that's when,
Right.
and that's what Eric is saying. This stuff is fleeting.
Yes.
In fact, Proverbs 31, beauty is deceptive and it is fleeting. And that's what the soulmate thing is. It is a fleeting thing. You think that we get you. We think that it's that we've cut out our special little place in the universe. But really, all marriage is built on mutual respect, mutual sacrifice, and the ability to help one another. It's in the marriage vows, in times of trouble as well as in times of joy.
It's to serve, not to be served. And the soulmate, syndrome is that, feelings. It's all based on these
Well,
warm,
it's very
It's
fuzzy
egocentric.
feeling
Yeah.
that this person's going to meet my needs, all the needs that I have, in whatever context. And, that there is a honeymoon period, but that ends soon. And you start dealing with the realities of a relationship. And if it's based on that, I thought this was the one, but obviously she or he is not the one, then
Yeah, I
we
really,
got a
I
real
really
problem.
didn't know her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right. Now, I actually heard, and this is funny, this comes from a comedian who is Indian, and his parents in India were met through an arranged marriage. They wanted to have the same for him, and he talked about how that worked in that system. The arranged marriage, they developed a wonderful relationship. But it was completely contractual.
Well, now we're going to have to get into baptismal theology because that's the argument we use in that. The idea of whether we baptize a baby first. I know I'm going to come back to your point. Whether we baptize a baby first and then that baby comes to a pronounced relationship in Jesus, or whether we first have the baby that adult make a pronouncement and then we baptize them. I often relate that to the idea of marriage. That for some, you can get married based on an arrangement and find love. Today, we don't think like that. We think I need to first find love and then have the relationship. And I think a reasonable mind would say it can work either way.
Right.
So I can see where an arrangement. I wish that my parents had arranged my marriage.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about. I mean, chasing.
What, did they have better taste? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
Wait a minute. Did I just impugn
Yeah,
myself?
you just
I mean,
just-
no.
in a couple of ways.
I handed
Okay.
you the shovel, but you did the digging.
No, they
you
did.
better
They had,
distract Alan
Yeah,
Sunday morning.
yeah. Hit the EBS tone quick.
But it is an interesting subject here because it does. When we talk about, and there's another article we may not get to, but it talks about millennials that have a low opinion of the church. I think often because millennials don't feel like they're going to meet anybody.
Yeah.
They're going to meet anybody there, and I hear that often.
Is that really what you took away from that article?
No, I didn't take away from the millennial article.
Oh, okay,
But
all
I'll
right,
say
yeah.
I'll just say that that's my own experience in talking to some millennials, and I'll recommend to them to go to church if they're not going right now. That you'd be surprised that who you might meet.
Well, having
I
lived
hope
on,
it's Christ, actually.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
besides that,
lived in a Christian community on a ship for a number of years, and there were a lot of young people, a lot of single people on that ship, and it was a place where we had women who were just these vivacious, talented, godly women. We called them, treasures, unclaimed treasures. Mm-hmm. And the guys that would come on the ship would be completely oblivious to this opportunity that God had given them to be able to have a really great pool of women to be able to, develop a relationship with.
stuck on a ship.
Yeah, and so and we found it was a fascinating thing that there is some reality to that opposites attract, and so in that culture that we were in, we could watch these relationships develop, and they would get to finally to the point we call them SRs, special relationships. And they had to be so careful because they knew that every 400 people are on that ship are watching every move they make. It's like having,
Right.
400 aunts and uncles, present all the time,
Yeah.
and watching them go through this courtship process. It was an amazing thing. And many of them would go to cross-cultural relationships. It was fascinating. And so all the things that you would think where the world would say, look for the compatibility, what was going on was really just kind of the opposite of that. There was this opposite attract thing. And, they were looking for and what we discover is that those that are different, I mean, some of us marry people very much like us, but some of us marry very opposite. And there is a, God does it, a completion thing
Right.
that takes place in that relationship.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters. Hey, welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. And our final article today that we want to talk about is about tiny churches. It's from Religion News Service, written by Kathy Lynn Grossman. It's called Tiny Churches, Big Hopes, Why Some Thrive Despite the Odds. It opens up with, a new report detailing the spiritual, demographic, and financial challenges faced by small religious congregations meant little to the Reverend Robert Bartlett. She plants her hopes for First Church in Sterling, Massachusetts on firmer ground. Bartlett's quote here is, "This does not look like a dying and sad church. It looks like a vibrant and active church on a Sunday morning, who usually sees about 130 people on Sundays, even though the sanctuary was built back for the days when 300 came to worship. Just this year, 30 new members have joined, including young adults such as Ann Taft, 28, who delighted in the warm welcome at First Church. Everyone was just so excited I was there. More people in the pews, more energy for programs, more funds to maintain the roof. These are all keys to survival in such small congregations, according to the latest Faith Communities Today report released on Monday by the Hartford Institute for Religion Research." Well, as one in a small church, and also who looks at a lot of small churches that close. I've seen a number of them just in my short tenure. And also we know that there are churches that have that struggle, and for lots of different reasons, though. But Doc, what about the small church as a thriving part of our religious community? Is that do you see that there's reason to be pessimistic about it, or optimistic, or hopeful? Where are you there?
Well, it's okay. So this is what's interesting to me is that when I was a kid, the church I was in was 100 and a half, I don't know, small frame structure, disciples of Christ. Most of us were related to one another, or we certainly lived within a couple miles of the church.
Right.
We plowed each other's fields. We married each other's daughters off. I mean, that's kind of the way it worked. And then the only large churches around us were the Catholic churches, because they were parish-based models, so they drew from a large area. All our churches were small, they thrived, they were wonderful. What began to happen is a kind of a polarization. This is probably about the time I'm in my 20s, we begin to see the movement toward the mega church on the one hand, and then we begin to see the dissolution of the smaller churches on the low end.
Right.
But there's always been kind of a middle-sized church, what we sometimes call a meta church, or a little big church, that have seemed to exist. The large churches then did an interesting thing. They all tried to divide themselves up into what? Small churches.
Campuses, yes.
So the campuses, the house church movement, the cell group movement, all became a way to reestablish what we all know was missing, that we had at the Little Remsen Christian Church, which was authentic community. The big churches didn't have it.
Right.
What's happening right now is, yes, there were some small churches that began to close, and we've seen that in communities for a lot of reasons. But the resurgence is in these churches of about 100, 150 people, churches like yours, Ben.
Right.
You know, I've been there. The community is authentic. These people are really committed to the Lord. They're committed to the community that exists at Broad Creek.
Okay,
Those
well, I
churches-
have to interject how he actually described it.
What?
He actually described it to me as a family reunion, and some jerk got up and gave a sermon.
I did not. Well, the jerk was me then.
No, that was me.
I said it was like going to a down east family reunion where a guy happened to get up and deliver a powerful message.
There was a different
There's a
description
lot-
at one point.
There was a lot of family. Those churches
Yeah.
that are currently existing in that size, where people have accepted the fact that a caring cell, what we used to call in seminary the caring cell church, one pastor knows everybody's name, knows everybody's concern, can get to everybody's house in 1 year. Those churches with good pastors are thriving. We just got back from a 10-day trip. We were up in Hyde County for a while. Went up and visited the folks at St. George's Church in Lake Landing, went to St. Tom's in Bath. These are churches that are about that size. They're historic, oldest churches in North Carolina, congregations of about 100, and their lives are very exciting. They're very enthusiastic about the Lord, and they're very enthusiastic about what they're doing. This is the future of the church, is the 100-member church, not the 10,000-member church.
Robert?
Yeah, well, I agree, and it's an urban-rural somewhat distinction as well. And what I've discovered is most churches you can get up to about 150 members, maybe 200 with one pastor, and then you have to start looking at
Staff.
bringing in staff
Yeah.
to meet the needs and the neediness factor of the congregants has changed a bit too from the old days where we all pooled together and, like you said, we fed each other, we sat with them during their illnesses, we did all that stuff, and we were part of a community church. We belonged to that area. There was almost a geographic more of a geographic element than a demographic element to the church. It crossed all the generational lines and all of that. Well, we now have, specialty churches where it's only young people.
Right.
They go there, or we've divided our services up. We have the
contemporary.
traditional versus the contemporary, and you get two different clientele basically for these different things. And so I agree with you. I think I'm of the small church movement. Now I'm not of the tiny church. And to me, a tiny church is 20, 30 people coming together. A small church is around 100, 150, 200.
And we
right
have
in that range.
60 to 70 generally.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
service.
And so you may have 250 on the books,
Right.
But you can only hustle up about 70 to 80 of those.
I've had the privilege to plant about 50 churches.
Okay.
And we tell our planters, when we work with a planter, we tell them the same thing every time. And that is the measure of ministry, and this is where most of us get it wrong. The measure of ministry is always qualitative. It's never quantitative.
Correct.
That's a hard statement to make at an annual budget meeting when your salary is about to get cut, but it is the fact. It is about a qualitative type of ministry that we have. And Ben, what I'm sure is that at your church, you know these people inside out, and they love you, and you love them, and there's a very high quality of pastoral care going on there. When I was young in ministry, one of my first churches was actually a fairly large church. And I remember coming to the ministerium. That's the local group of pastors that come together. And I remember what we used to say in our little rural community. And you walk into the meeting when you were new, and the other pastors would look at you and say, "So how many are you running on Sunday?"
You're running.
as if we had cattle.
Yeah.
And we established very clear pecking orders.
Right.
And the guy that was running 500, we listened to, and the guy that was running 50, we didn't.
That bivocational pastor didn't get a
right,
yeah.
not a nickel. So
Yeah.
what we're thinking now, when we're getting ready to plant a church right now, and the first thing we told the church planters is, let's get this thing going fast. Let's get it big. Let's really zoom up there and get 50 or 60 people in there.
Yeah.
because especially with a new pastor and a new planter, trust me, 50, 60 people and their issues is about as much as a new pastor can handle. And 100 people, I'm with you on this one, Rob. Believe me, there aren't too many pastors out there that can handle the issues in this world of 100 people. Well.
Yeah.
Right. I remember interviewing one of the mega church pastors one time, and I said, well, how do you do that? I mean, how do you possibly know who is coming to your church or any of those things?
Don't.
And he says you don't. He says this article talks about adapting. I think it's more of an adaptation in a larger church, because then they have to get councils, they have to get teams, they have to have. He said, teams of 12 who begat teams of 12. So you had to go out and create a bureaucracy, really,
Correct.
in order to deal with all the.
And there's
people.
nothing wrong with that.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean,
at
I
all.
hope what all the people at the mega churches out there listening are not hearing me say that it's bad to have large congregations. It's just a different way of doing it. It's a different dynamic.
Because they're successful by breaking it down into small groups.
Right. And what I'm saying, and I think what this article is talking about is there is actually life in the qualitative ministry of a small church. And it is the original. This is kind of how the church began. There were so very few mega churches in the year 300. This is kind of how we began. It really wasn't until we went to a more Catholic parish-based model that we see churches increase significantly, because they took in the people from large geographical areas.
Correct.
It was always small before that. And I like the small. I think it's good.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and as in serving that group, our mantra constantly is the Ephesians mantra, that our job is to equip the saints to accomplish the work of the ministry, and that as pastors, we are the coaches.
Right.
We're player coaches, but we're the ones who are helping them be the ministers, and it's not just bring them to the church and the pastors will take care of it.
Right. Right.
It's you are the guys. You are the priest, and you're the peculiar people, and we're equipping you to do
Well,
that.
we say you're baptized into ministry.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
not a small thing to say that. And on that note, I want to thank Reverend Robert Cornegay and Bishop Doc Loomis for joining us for this week's edition of Faith Matters here on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.